Good morning, everyone. If you would, grab a Bible and let's turn together to Luke chapter 22. Luke 22. We'll be centering our time in that place. Luke chapter 22. We'll read from there in just a moment as we get started in this part of our worship where we open God's Word and study from the Bible. Want to welcome all of you. We have a number of people here who are visiting, parents. There is evidently something going on with parents this weekend, so we're glad that you have chosen to stay over and be here with us on a Sunday morning and worship God together with us. Thank you so much for you being here. If you are visiting with us and you have some need, maybe you're looking for a place where you can serve God and worship with other believers, we'd love to talk to you about our work and what we do and believe here. So please stick around for a minute and let us help you in that. Or if there's some special need that you have, that you're thinking about something is you're wrestling with, something you're going through, and you think that in some way we could help you or that we could study the Bible about some topic with you, please let us know about that. But thank you so much for being here this morning. I want to read in Luke 22 and verse 54. Luke 22 and 54. It says, "Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, 'This man also was with him.' But he denied it, saying, 'Woman, I do not know him.' And a little later, someone else saw him and said, 'You are also one of them.' But Peter said, 'Man, I am not.' And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, 'Certainly, this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean.' But Peter said, 'Man, I do not know what you're talking about.' And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, 'Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and wept bitterly." This is such a sad moment because Peter and Jesus have been through so much together. How many miles have they walked together? How many conversations have they had? How many questions had Peter asked that Jesus answered? How many nights had they spent staying up late, discussing God's will? How would you feel if in your moment of greatest need, when everyone else has left you, you look and you see your one closest friend, and you say, "Surely he'll vouch for me." And when the moment comes, he acts as if he doesn't know you at all. Verse 61 says, "The Lord turned and looked at Peter." I just wonder what was in that look. What hurt, what disappointment that Peter has denied Jesus. But there's a bit of a mystery here. Why did Peter deny Jesus? I don't know if you've thought about it very much. But it's not as if Peter didn't know the stakes and what was going to happen in this situation. Peter said to him a little earlier, we read this, Aaron read it for us, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." He knew the stakes. Or he says, "If I must die with you, I will not deny you." He knew the stakes. So isn't it a little surprising that when death may be on the table, instead he denies? Or you might say, well, maybe he denied because he was just one of those half-hearted disciples. You know, his mouth wrote big checks that he never wanted to cash. But really, Peter's not someone who doesn't love Jesus enough or isn't committed enough. This is Peter in Luke 5 and verse 8, who, getting the great catch of fish, says, "Depart from me, O Lord, for I am a sinful man." And then after he walks on the water, those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Peter is right there among them. In Matthew 16:16, Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," which is the right answer, by the way. Jesus is going to ask Peter, "Do you love me?" He says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. You know everything. You know that I love you." This is not an issue of Peter not being invested or not caring. The Gospels are extremely consistent in showing Peter as highly committed to Jesus. So isn't there a mystery to say Peter is ready to die for Jesus, and yet he doesn't die for Jesus? At least not yet. That in this moment, he fails. How do we go from someone so committed and so dedicated? How do we go from someone walking away from his fishing nets when Jesus calls him? How do we go from someone who walks on water and fights for his rabbi? How do we go from someone like that to someone saying they don't even know him? How does that all change in a moment? I want to think about that with you. I want to talk today about why Peter denied Jesus. And you might ask, well, why are we going to talk about that? And I want to tell you why we're engaged in this study this morning. The main reason is sometimes we make big mistakes like Peter did. We know what Peter went through, and we will find it extremely relatable because we mess up too. And I want us to think about how we can avoid mistakes like that. And I also want to think about how we can bounce back from mistakes like that, the way Peter did. And I want us to think about how we can learn compassion for people who make mistakes like Peter. So that's our goal this morning. Let's analyze this failure and think about how we can avoid it and how we can also relate to it. First, Peter denied Jesus because he was proud. He was proud. Now, all four Gospels detail the fact that Jesus warns Peter on the day it happens that he will deny him this night. And all four Gospels record that in some way Peter pushes back on that statement. Look in Luke 22, back up in 31. Luke 22 and verse 31. It says, Jesus' words, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. So that statement, verse 31 and 32, is ominous. Satan demanded to have you. And he says, I pray that your faith will not fail. And when you have turned again or returned to me, converted, moved back, changed. These words imply a failure. You're going to fail tonight, Peter, but it won't be an ultimate failure. I pray that your faith will not fail. And how does Peter respond to that? I mean, it is ominous. He responds in verse 34, verse 33, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. No, I'm ready to die. And Jesus says in verse 34, no, you will deny me. Aaron read this earlier, John 13:37. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you'll follow afterward. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I hope you get a feel, by the way, if you don't know Peter well, for his personality. He's the type who's always going to say whatever he's thinking. So you say, I can't follow you. Why not? Why not? He might even interrupt you so he can ask his question. I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. So here again, you have Jesus saying, hey, tonight, before the sun comes up tomorrow, you're going to deny me 3 times. So I hear your words, Peter, but there's something else you need to hear. I want you to turn with me. Leave your marker or your finger here in Luke 22. We'll come back in a moment. Let's go back to Mark chapter 14. Mark 14. Because while these two statements seem a little tame, Mark and Matthew record Peter being a little more obstinate about this. And I think it shows a little bit of where his mind was at. Mark chapter 14 and verse 27. Mark 14:27, and Jesus said to them, you will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter said to him, even though they all fall away, I will not. And Jesus said to him, truly, I say to you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said the same. So here, a lot of the affirmations Peter makes are defensive. I hope you hear that. Jesus is saying, you're all going to fall away. And Peter says, maybe they will, but I won't. Even if they all fall away, which, by the way, is throwing everybody under the bus. Even if they all fall away, I will not. And Jesus says, oh, no, Peter, you will deny me. You specifically. In fact, he switches from the plural you to the singular you. You, Peter, you will deny me tonight 3 times. And Peter says, no. Do you hear it? Peter takes Jesus' warnings in a defensive way. We have conversations like this all the time. I don't know if you've noticed this. Where someone tries to tell us something, and they say, there's a risk, there's a danger here. And instead of hearing it and listening and even appreciating the fact that someone has taken the time and effort to warn us, we often react defensively. Say, what's that supposed to mean? You don't have a lot of faith in me, do you? You think that's a risk for me? You don't know me at all. And so we get defensive as if it's an attack. And that's what Peter does. But in that moment, what we're doing is pride. We think we're so great that we don't need the warning. Don't you warn me. Who do you think you are? And Peter reacts that way to Jesus. He can't imagine a scenario in which he would ever deny Jesus. He knows his heart. He knows what he wants to be and do. He says, no, that's not going to happen. Not me. Not ever. I do wonder if Peter thought that this would play out in a particular way. I wonder if Peter thought there would be a battle. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And so laying down his life is very much fighting for Jesus. Oh, that would be easy. But I don't know if Peter ever imagined that his denial would involve a servant girl and that would be the Achilles heel. But he failed to heed Jesus' warning because he becomes proud. So the opportunity here for thoughtful self-introspection passes because Peter is proud and he does not receive the warning. Second, I want to argue that Peter was confused. I want you to go with me back to Luke 22. We're going to read some verses here that have some controversy and some different interpretations to them. I'm going to tell you what I think. You're welcome to disagree, but I hope you'll hear me out because I think it sets the scene for what we discover later in the chapter that I find a little confusing if we don't see what Peter's thinking. Luke 22, and I want to read beginning in verse 35. Luke 22:35. It says, he said to them, when I sent you out with no money bag or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything? They said, nothing. He said to them, but now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack. And let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors. For what was written about me has its fulfillment. And they said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. So Peter has just affirmed his loyalty. If I have to die with you, I won't deny you. But now the scene shifts. There was a time, Jesus says, where I sent you out and you lived off the generosity of other people. You didn't even need a wallet. You just go out and people will provide for you. They'll feed you. They'll have you in their home. In other words, they'll be generally supportive and positive towards you. But then he says, now things are different. Verse 36, but now let the one who has a money bag take it. You're going to need your money. Nobody's giving you anything. And let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. In other words, people are going to be against you rather than for you. Just like I'm going to be numbered with the transgressors, they're going to view you as enemies. Now, the disciples do not hear the general tone of this. They take it literally. And so they say in verse 38, hey, we got 2 swords. Is 2 enough? And Jesus says, it is enough. That last phrase, by the way, it is enough. That's my ESV translation. Some versions have him saying, no more of this. That's enough talk. I don't want to talk about this anymore, as if Jesus is frustrated. And some say enough as in, hey, 2 swords is plenty. That's all we'll need. By the way, there are more than 2 of them. Okay? So we have some weirdness going on here with the swords. And so they go with the swords out to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray with the swords. Okay? And then when the army comes to arrest Jesus and a great crowd is there, I want you to see what happens in Luke 22 and verse 47. It says, while he was still speaking, there came a crowd. The man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? We know what they're thinking. They've just been talking about swords. Hey, we got these swords, Jesus. You said we're going to need swords now. So now is now the time. We're going to strike with a sword. Think about that. They are ready to fight. Verse 50, and one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. Now we learn from John that one of them, Luke doesn't throw him under the bus, but one of them was Peter. John tells us it was Peter that did the chopping, and he chops this man's ear off. Peter is ready to start the battle. Don't think he was aiming for the ear. Think he was trying to kill someone. Verse 51, but Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. No more of this. At the moment of truth, when his followers are ready to fight, Jesus says, no, we're not doing this. He refuses to fight, and he refuses to let his followers fight for him. Now, I want you to see in some of the other Gospels how this goes, because it's a little more than just what Luke reveals. This is Matthew 26. Then Jesus said to him, speaking of Peter, put your sword back into its place, for all who would take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? Put your sword up. We're not doing that, Peter. This is John 18. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? Peter, you've missed it. And it's all about the scriptures being fulfilled. It's about God's cup that he's giving me. I'm going to do this. You're not going to fight for me. Just imagine. This is a forceful rebuke. No more of this. Put your sword in its sheath. We're not doing this. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. But we are not going to fight. So imagine what it would be like to be Peter in this moment. You thought it was time for a holy war. You know, the kind of war that you pray in the garden and then take up your sword the next moment. You thought Jesus talking about swords meant it's the moment of truth, and your adrenaline goes up. And then things start happening very fast. Why is Judas here? And then you realize what Judas has done. And you realize what's about to happen to Jesus. And so he swings at Malchus, a sign of his love for Jesus, his commitment to the cause. I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to die. I've said it and I mean it. And now I'm going to show you. I'm putting my money where my mouth is. But instead of a battle, what you hear is Jesus shouting, no more of this. Put your sword up. Instead of war, what you see is Jesus bound and arrested and led away. Sometimes things happen that throw us for a loop. We think things are going to go one way and they go the complete opposite. Sometimes, in one moment, things we've believed, maybe about a person, things we believe maybe about God, suddenly we realize they're not stable. We were wrong. And that feeling, that disorientation, that confusion, it often leaves us saying, I don't know what to do now. Sometimes we need some time to process it and step back from it. But sometimes, like with Peter, things are happening all around us anyway. Life doesn't stop just because we need a moment. And he was awfully confused. What do we do now? Perhaps echoing in his memory is his own words. Far be it from you, Lord, this will never happen to you, as he watches it begin to happen to Jesus. So I believe one of the reasons Peter denies Jesus is that he was confused. Now, you may disagree with my reading of that. That's fine. We could still be friends. It'll be okay. But I do think there is some element to Peter's expectation that lead to him being in a state where he considers what happens next. The third thing I want to show you is that he was scared. This is a little more straightforward. Luke 22 and verse 54. Luke 22:54. Then they seized him, that's Jesus, and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. And Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light, looking closely at him, said, this man also was with him. But he denied it, saying, woman, I do not know him. So John tells us that he knows the high priest, and so he kind of gets Peter into that area, and Peter is standing outside. John actually goes in closer. And there's a girl who sees him, but suggests that all the hubbub about Jesus should also include Peter. Now, inside the high priest's house, they are meeting to condemn Jesus. It's his trial. The last time he saw Jesus, of course, he's bound, he's arrested. So if you're Peter, what are you thinking might happen? You know, you're kind of, I'll just stay back here. Because if I get too close, suddenly it'll be a two-man trial. Everybody knows that Jesus had some men. What if they discover that I'm one of them? Notice that her statement in verse 56. reads like an accusation to other people. This man also was with him. Like she's telling others, hey, everybody, look. And so Peter is scared, and he denies. Verse 58, a little later, someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them. He says, man, I am not. So here some time passes. He probably doesn't want to own up to it in front of everybody. So, just wait it out. Let's just see what happens. And here comes someone else. No, I've already decided. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. Verse 59, and after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, certainly this man also was with them, for he too is a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you're talking about. And immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. Now they notice he's a Galilean. He has an accent. The evidence is starting to mount. And he invokes a curse on himself, we read in Matthew, and swears he does not know Jesus. John also says that one of the accusers was related to Malchus, the guy with the ear surgery that then was undone. So he's going to notice that Peter might be associated with this group. I don't think this is hard, right? This is the easiest point. It's going to end poorly for Jesus. And if Peter owns up, it might end up bad for him, just because he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Have you ever had a situation where you thought, man, if I could just get out of this, it'll be okay? So if I have to lie a little bit, if I have to act a little bit out of character, just to get out of this. But then I'll go back to who I really am, and then I'll do the right thing again. But I just got to get out of this. It's too desperate a situation. That's Peter. And maybe that one little lie then just happens to become another lie and another lie. And so you begin to feel kind of bad about it. But after all, you got to save your own skin. This is Peter. So before we start to condescend to him, I think we need to ask the question, have you and I ever done something foolish or out of character because we were scared? Fourth, Peter denies Jesus because he was flawed. This temptation is right in Peter's weak spot. If you study the life of Peter, you notice that Peter's major flaw is that he is always saying what he's thinking. And that sometimes he's even willing to argue with Jesus, who he believes is the Son of God, when he thinks Jesus is wrong. He cannot stop himself. Sometimes that's really good. Like when he says, depart from me, O Lord, for I'm a sinful man, or you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's good. Good, Peter. Good job speaking. He speaks before everyone else. And sometimes that is bad. Like when he turns around and says, far be it from you, Lord, that'll never happen to you, and argues with Jesus about the fact that he'll be crucified. Or when Jesus is washing feet, and Peter says, you'll never wash my feet. This is Peter. He's just, for better or worse, he's going to say it. And isn't it interesting that in this moment of truth, Peter is asked questions that he must answer. He's under the gun, and his mouth is involved. And he's scared, and he's confused, and he's a little proud. And so in that moment, he says exactly what he is worried about. He says exactly what he is thinking. It is too much for him. Peter is different from Judas. Judas's flaw is about money and greed. And so in this moment of truth, that's the temptation that appeals to him, and he sells Jesus for those 30 pieces of silver. That's not Peter. Peter doesn't seem, there's no amount of money that's going to get him to deny Jesus. It is instead this moment where all of these forces converge at once. He is in a bad place, and he says what he thinks will get him out of the situation. So I believe that's why Peter denies Jesus. But I want to stress, as I said at the beginning, that we don't talk about these things to condemn and criticize Peter. I want to stress that it can happen to me. Because all four of these have been, and from time to time continue to be true of me. I get proud, and sometimes I think I'm immune, or I'm different, or I'm better. Like Peter, sometimes I think, they may all deny, but I never would. I get confused. Sometimes I wonder, why did God let that happen? Or why did God reveal himself in that way? Why doesn't God do this or that? Sometimes I'm not sure what I'm doing. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm doing the right things. I just feel a little lost. Sometimes I get scared, and I act out of anxiety and fear rather than faith. And I'm flawed. And if I don't work to overcome those flaws, or if tempting situations arise, I'm just as susceptible as Peter was. The spirit is willing, as Jesus told Peter, but the flesh is weak. And I want you to hear that none of those are an excuse. They are a warning. It can happen to us. So as you read that, I want you to think about your own life and how you've been in states like these. And perhaps even when you've made major mistakes, it may be that your mistakes read like Peter's mistakes. But I also want to stress that you can come back. Peter did, because this became part of his story. When you talk about Peter, you got to include all the ups and all the downs. They're all a part of his story. And yet the denial doesn't define Peter. Peter, after he denies Jesus and Jesus looks at him, he goes out and weeps bitterly. But Peter's not done with Jesus, even though Jesus has died. Peter is the one racing John to the empty tomb. Peter is the one where the angel appears, Jesus appears to the women and says, go tell the disciples and Peter. Peter is the one who gets up with the 12 and begins to preach the gospel on Pentecost. Peter is the one. We're studying in the book of Acts right now. Have you noticed that Peter goes before the same Sanhedrin that he was so terrified of? And instead of fear, he is bold. He stands up to them. If you're going to kill me, kill me. Peter is the one that Jesus says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Take care of my people. And Peter continues to serve Jesus. In fact, I find it most impressive that he spends the rest of his life with a death sentence over his head. You know, Jesus says, you're going to die for me. And yet Peter remains brave for the rest of his life. He becomes something awesome. Peter's failure is a part of his story, but it does not define him. We all have some big mistakes that we've made. They are a part of our story. And we all connect with Peter because of that. But following Jesus is not about having a spotless record of perfection. If that's what you think it is, please listen to me. None of us is perfect. Very often, I hear people frustrated and disappointed by local churches because they say things like, everybody in that local church seems so perfect. Please get to know us better. We are not perfect, and that's why we're here. Because we are broken and flawed and weak, and we need help. We need forgiveness, and we're trying to grow so that we don't mess up like we have in the past. This is who we are. We are people like Peter. Jesus says to Peter, when you've turned back, strengthen your brothers. Can I say a word about that? We usually think that our failures disqualify us from serving other people. You know, I'm not good enough to help someone. I can't talk to them. I can't teach them. I can't be a mentor to them. I can't help them with their sin. I'm not perfect. I'm not good enough. Peter shows us that logic is exactly backward. It is your failures, it is your weaknesses that give you connection to speak into other people's lives. That's what happened with Peter. Peter was not a perfect man, and yet he became a powerful preacher of the gospel because as a flawed man who was forgiven by God, he could offer others what he had received. This is our role. In fact, don't you find Peter a lot more relatable than people we don't have the full details of their mistakes? I think often people tell me that they find Paul intimidating because we don't see all the weaknesses in Paul that we see in Peter. But here is Peter relatable. And I want you to imagine if Peter were a member of this church, how it might change how you would view him. To know that he was a weak man who was flawed and had a long rap sheet and some major public mistakes, who still was serving Jesus. How would you feel if that man came up to you and put his arm around you and said, I know you messed up today. I know exactly how you feel. I know what it's like to make a mistake that everybody knows about. Everybody who has lived since then knows about Peter's mistake. But that's not the end. Come on, let's do better. Isn't there a power to reading 1 Peter and hearing Peter, this man, say things like, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord? He knows what it is to not be humble. To say things like, don't be surprised at the fiery trial that's to come upon you. You know, when you have a trial that surprises you, sometimes it throws you off a little bit. Do you think Peter knew anything about that? To say, be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, is prowling about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Do you think Peter knew anything about the adversary? Don't you hear how it changes us to say, we have made mistakes, but now we serve others and we serve Jesus together. This is our role. So please don't think that making mistakes disqualifies you from serving the Lord. I also mentioned compassion. Peter shows us that we know exactly what it's like to fail. We understand. It makes sense to us. We know why people fail. We know how they fail. We are familiar personally with the dimensions of failure. So, it's not just horrible people who fail. We're all going to struggle with mistakes. Can't I learn to show love and mercy to others instead of condemnation? Can't I learn to connect with people on the basis of our common, flawed humanity? Can't I care? Can't I offer them a better way? I want to encourage us. This is a sad moment, but we all have sad moments. Jesus offers us redemption and new hope. The question is, what will we do with it? So I want to offer this morning the invitation of the Lord Jesus to anyone who is broken and flawed and has made mistakes, to the sinners among us, which is, of course, all of us. And if you are ready today to receive that redemption, to have your life changed, to have your life forgiven, redirected, to know that your sins have been atoned for by the sacrifice of the perfect Lamb, and to trust in him as God's Son sent from heaven, who is now leading us, showing us the right way, giving us new hope and a new direction. If you're ready to turn away from your life of sin and become his follower, to receive his forgiveness, today's the day. Please, let us help you to do that. If you're ready this morning, we invite you to come to the front.